Okay, hi my friends. My name is Katrina Kofed. In case you're new here, I'm a non-diet nutritionist and health coach. Today we're going to be talking about an honestly really tragic story. A vegan raw food influencer died last week, presumably from starvation, and it's something that I feel like really exemplifies what can happen when wellness culture and diet culture kind of converge to promote eating disorders and very disordered eating. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story and then kind of give you my perspective. So if you don't know me, I don't talk about this a lot, but I have been vegan now for 9.5 years, and I have seen a lot in that time, especially 10 years ago when I first started eating more plant-based. This was like 2013, early 2014. There was a lot of content around eating raw till 4, eating raw, fruit only diets. There was a diet that emphasized 80-10-10, so 80% carbs, 10% fat, 10% protein. There was just a lot of content swirling around on the internet, and especially YouTube at that time, that was promoting like a raw, all fruit or mostly fruit diet for a number of reasons. And it was pretty crazy. So I really think this feels like a flash, like a blast from the past in that regard. But this really tragic story also goes to show how harmful diets like this can be, not so much because of the diet itself, but rather the thinking and the mindset eating this way can sort of like lead you down. So let me tell you a little bit about this story. So Zhanna D'art was a vegan raw food influencer, and she died last week at the age of 39 in Malaysia after having an infection for what seems like a month or maybe longer. And she allegedly had been only eating durian or jackfruit for, I want to say it was like 4 years. That's what I had read. And I'll post some of the links online from some of the articles that I found. But this is a really tragic story, and I think it goes without saying that this is very much a case of someone who wanted to starve themselves, and whether or not there was a diagnosed eating disorder, clearly there was some orthorexia and or anorexia at play here. So it's really, I was just reading an article that had interviewed, someone had interviewed her mom, and her mom had spoken out about that she had tried to get her daughter to seek treatment and tried to help her, and really tried to get her off this path that she was on, and she just refused to change her behavior, to do anything differently. And this is just like the saddest part of eating disorders, is that if a person is so stuck and so deep in the rabbit hole of their own eating disorder and they don't want to get better, it becomes very difficult for any outside party to sort of change their mind or to sort of interfere with that. And it would be easy to dismiss this sort of case, I think, as like, oh, this is like, you know, a tragic story, but this is someone with an eating disorder, and eating disorders can be deadly. You know, eating disorders are among the most deadly mental health disorders. So But I really encourage you to like look deeper past that, because I think this is really exemplary of what can happen when we promote wellness culture and when we promote diet culture, and what happens when we talk about clean eating and processed foods are poison, and you know, anything with more than 5 ingredients is bad, because that is what I see a lot of online, especially in wellness culture. I just did a TikTok video about this book that I found last night called Metabolical, and it's talking all about how food in the US is poison. And the book calls all of the food, like ultra processed food, poisonous. Now, this isn't to say that ultra processed foods are super nourishing or nutritious by any means, but it becomes so divisive when we use when we use words like poison, and you know, it's so harmful and it'll like wreak havoc on your gut. Like when we use these really dramatic and inflammatory terms to talk about food, it can really scare people. And to the less educated consumer, you know, the average consumer who hasn't studied nutrition for years and years and doesn't have a background in science, they're not going to be able to necessarily distinguish between what is like an overly dramatized claim about processed food versus what is the actual truth, and how is this processed food going to affect them. So you would not believe the number of people that I've spoken to who are deathly afraid of sugar, who are so concerned about eating carbs, who are so concerned about anything processed, anything with more than a few ingredients, you know, or any ingredient that they can't pronounce. And this is really where like we start to see the slippery slope of more disordered eating behavior. And that's why I want to point out that even though this case about, this vegan influencer who passed away essentially from starvation seems very extreme, we start to see that happening in the sense of like people going down the slippery path more and more within wellness culture. So I think of Goop, and I think of like Gwyneth Paltrow and what you'll read on her website, or what she eats in a day, or like Kourtney Kardashian and people like this who are promoting these ultra wellness sort of protocols, which is totally fine. If anyone, people can do what they want. Like, I want you to do what you want, but it becomes a different case when you are talking about foods that are so bad and are so harmful to your body in such a dramatic and negative light. So when I first went vegan, again 9.5 years ago, I was watching these vegan influencers online. A lot of people were raw till 4, and if you're not familiar, eating raw means exactly what it sounds like. It means eating raw fruits and vegetables. So raw foods only. I'm not talking raw meat. It means following a raw plant-based vegan diet. So literally raw fruits, raw vegetables, nuts, seeds, and that's like pretty much it. So nothing can be cooked. And the whole intention of that is that you're getting the most vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients from these foods possible, versus cooking them destroys the nutrient quality, right, of the food. So what is really such a bummer about, these sort of extreme diets is that raw foods are super healthy, right? I encourage people eating raw fruits and vegetables all the time, like whether it's in my content online or whether it's with clients, we're finding ways to work more fruits and veggies and just like whole plant foods into their diet. I encourage consumption of raw foods, but I would never encourage strictly consumption of raw foods. And I just remember this raw food movement had, I myself tried to do this, where I was eating like 5 or 6 bananas a day and then like a smoothie bowl for dinner. And it just sounds ridiculous now looking back at it, but really this was one before I had gone to school about any of this. And 2, when I also really just wanted to lose weight more than anything else and was very worried about what about all these ingredients in processed food, and raw foods are the most nutrient dense and they're the most whole food, and your body can't handle a lot of different types of food at once, and combining foods is bad, like all these different things. And this is really where it can get so harmful to take our health advice from influencers online, which obviously, hindsight's 2020, we know that now, but it's really something that's worth talking about, because the wellness influencers you follow, might not seem like they're doing anything negative by talking about like, oh, this thing has fewer ingredients, or this food is so clean, and again, by all means, if you want to choose the products with cleaner ingredients, you are free to do so, and I encourage you to do so. But it's more that I think we need to be very cognizant of how we speak about these foods. And I mentioned this too in a TikTok I recorded yesterday, that when we call foods poisonous, when we call foods, they're so bad for you, sugar is ruining your gut, like it's spiking your blood glucose and it's causing you to store more fat because of the insulin, like whatever it is, when we are fear mongering around just regular foods, people don't know any better, and then therefore just like buy into this food fear, or to whatever it is, whether it's ingredient fear or sort of like food group fear, if you will, right? So I spend a lot of my time as a non-diet nutritionist just getting people back to the basics and having them learn and understand, like, hey, a well-rounded meal includes carbs, protein, and fat. It includes multiple different meal components. No carbohydrates are not bad for you. Like bread will not kill you. If you're not gluten intolerant, you don't need to be eating gluten-free bread. All these different things. And it's because there is so much sort of fear-mongering around foods and around different ingredients, right? So I think we really throw the baby out with the bathwater when, for example, like we talk about how bad gluten is, but in reality, gluten is really only harmful for people who need to be gluten-free, for people who have celiac disease or gluten allergy, right? So it just becomes this whole thing of we can want to pursue more nutrient-dense eating, and we can want to maybe eat more whole foods, right? And eat fewer ultra-processed foods, and I encourage your pursuit of that. But demonizing those ultra-processed foods in the process, along the way, does not really do you any good, and it doesn't do anyone around you any good either. And the reality is, at the end of the day, you know, so many Americans don't have access to whole fresh foods. A lot of Americans live in food deserts. And then even if they have access to fresh foods, they're not necessarily affordable, right? So there's a lot of systemic reasons. There's a lot of other problems that get in the way for people to access these healthier whole foods. And when we demonize processed foods, we are sort of creating this whole divide between people who have access to cook and eat healthy whole foods versus people who don't for whatever reason. So I really think of this as like elite wellness culture, and it can really seep in, and then you get a lot of stuff that goes into sort of like the privilege of being able to eat this way, right? And the status that we get from eating, you know, organic and whole foods only, and only clean ingredients and no ultra processed food, right? So it just, and I spoke about this a little bit in my Pilates video if you guys want to go check that out, but just this whole image of what it looks like to be this into wellness culture. So getting back to the story here, again, this feels like a really extreme and tragic case, but I think you can kind of start to see how when we start down the slippery slope of demonizing certain foods, of fear-mongering around a lot of foods, without any evidence or science to back up those claims, right? That's when things can become really harmful. And whether or not like anyone you know or you yourself personally ever progress to this point, which I hope, you know, no one ever does, right, to this point of such disordered eating, it is still, you know, it still negatively impacts yourself and the people around you, and especially your relationship with food. So that's really, I think, the takeaway here is we need to be more cognizant and mindful of how we're speaking about food, not making, you know, dramatic claims that are not true, and really using evidence when we are making claims around food. I always tell clients, like, processed foods, ultra processed foods, right, are not necessarily beneficial for your physical health, but they can have absolutely a role in your day-to-day eating, right? So processed foods have a role in my day-to-day eating habits. They're not like 80% of what I eat, but I eat chips, I eat bread, I eat tortillas, I eat waffles and cookies and brownies and, you know, whatever. I eat Beyond Meat, Impossible Burgers, like whatever the case may be. I'm not eating those all the time, but they are a regular part of my diet. And because I don't demonize those foods, I don't, you know, get any more negative impacts from that than I otherwise would maybe have in the past. So this is just really a reminder to be more aware of how you're speaking about these different types of foods, because one, it's probably affecting your own relationship with food, could be causing more guilt and shame and blame for yourself, which can very often feed into this whole yo-yo dieting behavior, and more so this whole trend of let me eat clean for a week because I want to lose weight, because I want to be better, right? We always associate eating clean with being better, like being the best version of ourselves. It's totally okay, again, to want to eat more nutritiously, but let's kind of swap out that word eating clean, because what does that really mean? What does that really mean? You know, that's interesting. So that's my 2 cents for now. I would love to hear what you guys think about this topic. And again, you know, a really extreme and very tragic case. My heart and my condolences really go out to Zhanna's family and her loved ones. But I really hope we can learn something from this, and not so much the obvious lesson of like, you know, no one should be starving themselves in the first place, because that goes without saying, and this is a really serious mental illness, but more so how our overall wellness culture and diet culture can sort of encourage some of these behaviors, at least at their beginning, right? So that's my 2 cents. I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments, and I will see you again soon in my next video.